everybody, it's Deb from Deb's RV Services, and this is an episode of Deb's Corner. So today I want to talk to you about the evolution of when I purchased my RV. Ultimately, I ended up getting a Class C, but I wanted to go through some of the phases that I went through in trying to figure out the process of which one would best suit me. So I'm going to go through how I figured this out, and hopefully this can help you. So when I first started camping, I started out with a tent. And it was only because I wanted to just get out there and try tent camping. I had only gone camping with my family where I didn't really have to do the work. I just enjoyed. So this was now my time to take my son, and I was also taking my niece, and I wanted to take them camping so that they could have a camping experience and enjoy all those great memories of camping. So I went out and I got a tent and went on my first trip, and I forgot the tent poles. So when I got to the campsite, I did not have a tent that I could put together. So I had to go to Walmart and purchase a new tent, and I put that whole thing together. Then I took the kids out, I think it was to see a movie or something, because when I got back, it was all wet inside. I forgot to close this thing up, like a vent up on the top, and so it rained. A rainstorm came by, just a quick one, but it was enough to get the inside wet. So needless to say, it was a miserable night because my son did not like camping. My niece slept like a log. I mean, you could have put her in a puddle and she would have stayed sleeping. She's a true camper. But my son didn't want anything to do with it. It was freezing cold, we were wet, and I was up all night, and that was a disaster of a first experience. But I still proceeded to do it again. So the next time I went tent camping, it was a lot better, and I proceeded to do that for a little while, and then moved up to a pop-up. Now at this time in my life, I wasn't on my own. I was with an ex-boyfriend of mine. So we went and we purchased a pop-up, and I was taking my son and my niece and taking the kids camping and enjoying all of the fun things that you do with like Halloween events and just really great memorable times for the kids. And that's what it was mostly about, was for the kids. So, and at that time, I still didn't have to put anything together because I handled the interior stuff while he handled the exterior stuff. And a lot of times that's what happens as a couple. I did know that between the two of us to put a pop-up together, it was a long process. We spent a lot of time putting the thing together, and then it took a long time to bring the thing back down. So I knew I was not going to get a pop-up as a single solo camper. I did not want anything to do with a pop-up because it just seemed very time consuming. Now, then we moved up to a travel trailer, and it was a nice Rockwood travel trailer, and it was a little bit longer. And what happened was my ex had to go from one type of truck and move up to another level of a truck, a diesel truck, so that he could tow this a little bit better. I still had no experience towing. And so I didn't know what it was like for him, but he said that it was really difficult to manage with just like it was like comparable to an F-150, and it just wasn't doing the trick for the length of the camper that we got. So that was the extent of my experience prior to being solo. I also camped a ton in a pop-up as a kid. That's what my dad had. I had so much fun in a pop-up. I honestly love them because they have a lot of window space, and it just seems like real camping. I don't know. There's something about a pop-up that brings back a lot of great memories. I just didn't want to have that as my towable by myself because I felt that it took too much to get ready. And when I was going to go out, my whole plan was to go out and do long-term travel and then eventually full-time. So I wasn't going to pick a pop-up because that was just not for me. So anyway, when my ex and I broke up and I wanted to still camp, I was really nervous about it. And this is where I really get into my story of how I evolved and what I was going to ultimately settle with. I hadn't towed before, and I decided to, let me start out. I was trying to figure out what to get, and I ended up getting another tent. So I got a minivan and a tent. When I was watching all my videos, I saw that there were a lot of people that either camped out of a minivan or they used tents if they didn't have an actual RV. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what a fun project. I'm gonna go get a minivan and I'm gonna deck it out and I'm gonna make it into a little tiny camper van. And then I'm also gonna have a tent that I totally clamp out and make it look really cool. And that way, if I need a tent, I can use it. But if I can just want to travel without it, I can use my minivan. So the minivan also, it was my daily driver, and my son was going through school at the time, and he was a drama kid, so he was on stage a lot. He was a singer, and I loved going to the school events, and then I would participate in some of those, and I'd take all the kids and pack them up in the back of the minivan. So it was a great vehicle for me. And then when I wasn't doing that, I could throw those seats down, flatten everything out, and make it into a little camper. And so it was really fun decorating. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I just adored some of these setups. When I went out for my first trip in the minivan and a tent, here's the problem I had. I lived in Michigan. Michigan is very, very humid. So when I had the windows all set up with little screens, and then I had my little fan on the inside, it was still so hot in my minivan that I was sweating. I really couldn't sleep, and then when I woke up in the morning, everything was wet on the inside, my blankets and stuff. So, and I had been camping on that trip. I had my dad camping right behind me, so I knew that they had an extra bed if things didn't work out for me. So I just went over there and I slept inside of their motorhome, and I was nice and cool. But I gave the tent and the minivan a good effort try. I loved that minivan a lot. It had so much space, so I really could see using one of those out west. I just needed more space. And as far as the tent goes, I kept that. I used to sleep out in my backyard in my tent. I mean, this is how much I wanted to do this, you guys. I loved everything about camping. I slept out in the backyard in a hammock. I slept in the backyard in a tent. And then when I finally got my little travel trailer, which I'm going to tell you about in a second, I spent all my time out there sleeping in my backyard, well, in my little RV or travel trailer. And I let my son sit inside the house and have his friends over, and they could play like Dungeons and Dragons, and I would stay outside in my little tiny trailer. It was so funny. But anyway, what I ultimately ended up getting was a tab. Now, I had been on Facebook groups. Like I try to tell you, go on Facebook groups and figure out what looks good to you, what draws you in, what do you look at and go, oh, that would be perfect for me. Now, tabs, they're made by New Camp, are known to be made very well. And at that point, I didn't really know a lot about what type I should get. I knew that I needed to get something small because I'd never towed before. So I went ahead and I took a look at that. It was like 1,500 pounds. And I knew that my minivan at the time could tow 3,500 pounds. Now at the time, I thought good enough, that's fine. And I thought if it's close to the range of the what I could tow, then that was fine. I knew I needed to have about 1,000 pounds of space between what I'm towing and what I'm allowed to tow. That's kind of what I thought in my head. Now that I have more experience, I know that I would want that number to be greater, because the closer you are to the amount that you can tow, the more difficult it is, the heavier it is, and the more sway you have. It's like you want whatever you're driving to be the beast. It's like right now when I drive my motorhome, that is a beast, and it is towing my tiny car. I don't even feel it back there. When I first started towing my little tab, it was a 2014. I got it used. I found it on a Facebook group, and the people that had it prior were immaculate, and they upgraded this thing to the 2018 model. They did an outstanding job. Everything was done at the New Camp factory, and it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. I adored this thing. I still miss it. And I took that thing everywhere, and I had to learn how to back up. I had to learn how to tow. I was so nervous. I had my ex go with me to pick it up. Now, who does that? My ex. So we went, and he was there with me. I was so nervous. I thought I was going to pass out, and I just wanted support. So I drove it all the way back, and I got it, put in my driveway and everything, and it fit in my driveway, which was the other criteria I had. And so I took it out. Now, the first time I went camping in it, I think the first camping trip, I blew a fuse, and then I just turned around and came back home because I didn't know what to do. Then the next time I went camping, I backed up and I was at a state park, and I was so far away from where you hook the 30 amp power cord that I had to back up my trailer like all the way into the woods. I mean, my trailer was a nugget. It was so tiny. It wasn't even on the parking cement anymore. It was all the way back into the woods. It's hilarious. But I had to do that because I didn't have an extension. It was a disaster because I unhitched and hitched 3 times before I figured out how to get it in the position right where I could actually plug it in. One of the times I actually tried to go to the store and find an extension cord, but everything was closed. It was a Saturday, I think, and everything was closed. So I learned a lot at that point. The unhitching and hitching back up, I got it down because I did it so many times. I was a sweaty mess and I was exhausted. And by the time I was done, but I was so happy that I did it. And it ended up being a nice, I think I spent a couple days there. I think that's what I did. It's just a couple days there, and I just kind of stayed inside my little nugget. I called her Joy. That was her name, because she brought me so much joy. So that was my first travel trailer. And then what happened was I decided to, during 2020, the market was really saturated. People were really looking for RVs. They wanted to go out and travel with travel trailers or RVs. And I could make back all the money that I spent, and I think even more than what I purchased Joy for. And I could sell her. And then I was part of a vintage camping group, and there was somebody that made a vintage camper, and it was super cool looking. I absolutely loved it. So I decided to sell Joy and get Ruby, who that's what I named the other. And it doesn't have a name. It wasn't a brand. It wasn't from a manufacturer. It was built by a guy that could build teardrops. And he was part of a vintage camping group. So we built it to look like a vintage camper. It was super cool looking. It had a beautiful long countertop, which is what really drew me in. And I think he sold it to me for $8,000, which was really not a bad price. Now I ultimately had that, and I could tow. At that point, I felt comfortable towing. I had zero problems. I only bought single axle trailers. I only had trailers that were, again, that one was probably 1,800 pounds. I had upgraded the minivan. So the minivan, ultimately, I was afraid that I didn't have enough of a towing. Oh, my light just went out. Okay, sorry about that. My light went out, so I had to get a little charger for it. So I decided to sell my minivan because I thought I should have a bigger tow capacity. I should have something that's at least 5,000 pounds to tow 1,800 pounds, and then it will tow like a dream. I really didn't have, when I think back, the minivan actually did very well, and I understand why now. Because they have a longer wheelbase. Things with a longer wheelbase it's going to feel smoother in your turns. And I didn't really understand that at the time. So I went and bought a Honda Pilot. I bought a used vehicle, and it towed 5,000 pounds, and I felt like, okay, I'm gonna be good. But then the towing was completely different, and I felt weird in it, and I felt like it didn't turn for me as easily like when I was backing it up. But I learned then that, okay, with the wheelbase, that minivan had a really long wheelbase, but I was kind of afraid to keep the minivan because I did take it into a mechanic, and they said that I was already getting some leaks around my transmission. So I know that the transmission has to go through a lot when it's towing, and I really didn't have it set up for, it wasn't a towing vehicle. And I think when you do have something like a minivan, you can get additional fans added. And if you're a mechanic out there, you can correct me. I don't really know the extent of it, but I recall being told that I could get extra fans to help with the transmission because when you're towing something, it really puts a lot of pressure on that. So anyway, I did get a Honda Pilot, and I started towing with that, and I had that vintage camper. Now I kept that up until I went to the inspection school. And I also had a van. So simultaneously, I had decided to buy a van and build it out. I had a friend that he was a builder, a cabinet maker, and he was helping me with that, but it ended up being a project that just got stalled, and I was making these monthly payments on it, and I realized it was a bigger task that I took on than I could handle at that time. I was just getting myself ready I hadn't gone to the inspection school yet, and I was just trying to get myself on my feet again, because I was losing work and I was on unemployment, the whole thing with the physical therapy. And so I was really kind of in this transition where I thought, okay, I can't handle this payment right now. I need to sell the van, and I need to get something that I can just pay cash for and have as my RV. So I ultimately had, when I went to the inspection school, I had the van and it was towing that vintage camper, and I ended up selling both of them. And when I did that, when I found out that I was getting the Class C motorhome, and I ended up purchasing that. Now, all this background story, and I hope I didn't bore you by telling you too much, I guess how I want to explain it to you is you need to take baby steps and see what you want to do. If you are a female like myself and you've never towed anything, it's not difficult to tow. It's just what I find difficult is it's not that I find it difficult. I find it easier to drive a motorhome. The reason is that I don't have to hook up and unhook. Even though I'm doing it to my car, it's easier. I don't have to worry about doing as many tasks when I get to a place. If I am going to be more long-term at a place, I would have a towable. Because I travel more, I want a drivable. I like the idea, being a single female, of driving whatever I have, if it was a van or a motorhome, to a spot and turning off the engine and hopping in the back without anybody really seeing me get out. If I had a towable and I was driving around the country, I would have to get out of my car and go into my towable and then cool it down and stay the night there. And if anything were to happen, which things don't really happen, I know that people worry a lot about the dangers of being on your own, being out there. I have not had any horrible experience. I've not had anything that has scared me. I have been around people, just leave me alone. I just do my own thing. But that extra step is that I also don't really exit my motorhome. I turn it off and I go in the back. Nobody really knows who's in there. A towable is great though if you already have a truck. So if you're a person, I didn't have that. I had a car, and then I had another like Honda Pilot, an SUV, and I didn't have a truck. So for me to upgrade to a truck would have been very expensive, and then have a towable that could accommodate me as a full-timer, I would want something bigger than a tab. I wanted something bigger than the tiny thing if I'm gonna go full-time. So for me, a motorhome was it. I love it, and I love it for being a person that travels a lot. If you're a person that wants to travel, then I think that getting a van or a small Class C, or if you are a family or you are somebody that wants the whole big size, you can do a Class A. And you're going to have the pros and the cons for each thing. You're going to have the bigger vehicle you get, the more gas mileage, the more expensive the tires are going to be, the more expensive all the work's going to be if you get into a Class A. But if you're fine with that, then go for it. You're going to be limited to more RV parks, and you're going to be limited to where you can stay. If you have a smaller towable, if you have a small Class C motorhome, you can get into things like national parks. You can pull into a lot of spots. I can go into any big grocery store, like as I'm driving along, like a Walmart, and I can pull into it and easily go in, get my groceries, and come back out. A towable can do the same thing. I mean, unless you have a giant towable, some of these big fifth wheels are pretty enormous. So you need to think about what type of camping you want to do, and that's why I suggest starting out in baby steps. You may want to, if you are still at home and you want to go full-time eventually, get something like a small towable now, get used to it, Take it around, go camping, spend time out there by yourself, go to state parks in your own state. Get comfortable with it and see how you like it. See if pretend that you live in there full time and see if it satisfies all your needs. Do you have everything that you need in that? Because the thing is that there is that element where some people decide to go bigger and then they're not happy that they did, because it's just taking up too much space. They can't do the things they want to do. So start out small, and if you need bigger, then you can go a little bit bigger later, because you can always sell what you have and buy something different. I mean, people sell their RVs all the time. People a lot of times only stay in their RVs a couple of years, and then they get something different. I really like what I have right now, and I may get something different, but for now, this is suiting me just fine, and I don't have a payment, which is huge for me. I love that I don't have a payment. So anyway, I hope that this information has helped you. I'm trying to give you my personal experience and what I did. But if you already know, you've already been camping and say you've already been towing, and you decide that, you want to get something bigger, or you want to switch over to a motorhome, then go for it. But if you've never done it before, start out small and then build your way up. Get that experience in now before you go full time. And that way, when you do, you'll kind of figure out what it is that you really want to get. All right, leave me a comment or ask me any questions and any ideas for other videos that you'd like me to make. What I'm going to do with Deb's Corner is give you my experience through the process when I started. So I'm telling you about this first process of when I started and how I chose the RV. And then next I can go into, maybe I'll talk about like the travel, like how I learned to travel further and further by myself, and how I wasn't comfortable at first, or maybe afraid of the winding roads, and what would happen. And I can go into that kind of experience next. But eventually I will get to places I visited, and I will start adding in more video of things I'm doing now, because I wasn't making travel videos all this time. So I've not been making videos of places I've been, but I'm gonna start throwing in some clips here and there and showing you guys different places, because I've been to a lot of wonderful areas. And I love to, of course, recommend coffee, because coffee is my favorite thing. And I love to get a latte. And so I will definitely start letting you know of my favorite coffee places. So I hope you all have a nice rest of your week, and I will see you on the next video.